Hello guys, welcome back to Pirates of Medicine. Today we are going to start with the anatomy base. This is going to be the fourth video in the anatomy base series. And before we start, I would like to share something with you. There have been a lot of requests for videos on path physio and physiology base. So we are going to definitely start with a video series on physiology base. And I wanted to ask you that should we start with the pathophysiology base or should we go with medical biology? So if you have an opinion, if you want and either of those, please drop down a comment below so that we can know which base should we upload first. And also like, share, subscribe, because if you do those things, we know that you are connecting with the channel and our videos are doing something helpful. So without any further delay, let's begin. Okay, so the 31st question in the base is that a 45-year-old man fell on the right knee and felt acute pain in the joint. On examination, severe edema on the anterior surface of the knee joint, crunching sounds are heard while moving the joint. They are asking which bone is destroyed. So at the knee joint, the bone of the knee joint is patella. The patella or the kneecap bone is a flat, rounded triangular bone which forms the joint capsule of the knee. So it connects with the femur above it, and below it connects with the tibia and fibula, and it protects the anterior joint surface of the knee. So if the patella is fractured, what happens is there is a characteristic crunching sound heard while moving the leg. So in the patient, here you can see crunching sounds are heard. So this must be a patella fracture, and pain and swelling are specific for fractures, all fractures, edemas, and bruising in the front of the knee should be there because there is a fracture of the knee. So crunching sounds are heard because the patella is broken and the fragments cause a crunching sounds while moving. So this is patella fracture for you. This is the patella, you can see. This is the anterior portion and this is the posterior part. So I think that clears this. So let's go to the next one. In the 32nd question, it says that during the operation on the hip joint of a 5-year-old, a ligament was damaged which caused bleeding. Which ligament was damaged? So for understanding this, pay close attention to that there was an operation on the hip joint. So hip joint is the articulation between the femur's head and the pelvic girdle. So there is a ligament called as round ligament of Fever, which is found on the head of the femur. So this ligament, the ligament of head of the femur or ligament teres femoris, is a triangular, somewhat flattened and band implanted by its apex into the anterior superior part of the fovea capitis femoris. Fovea capitis femoris is present on the head of the femur. So this ligament is attached to the head of the femur. What happens is that it contains a arteries branch in the capsule of the ligament. So this artery is acetabular branch of obturator artery. So obviously, if this ligament is damaged, then this artery, there is a high chance that this artery will be damaged. So it can cause bleeding. So this must be happening in this patient, that a 5-year-old child ligament was damaged which caused bleeding during the hip joint operation. So this must be the ligament of head of the thigh, because it is the only ligament of the hip joint which contains a branch of an artery which is the acetabular branch of obturator artery. Remember this. So this clears it. Let's go to the next one. A 6-year-old child fell on the cutting object and traumatized the soft tissues between the tibia and fibula. So what kind of bone connection was injured? So this is the tibia and this is a fibula. So there's a joint between them, the tibiofibular joint, and between them there exists a membrane which is called as interosseous membrane. So this is a membranous joint between two bones. So An interosseous membrane is a thick, dense, fibrous sheet of connective tissue that spans the space between the two bones, forming a type of syndesmosis joint. So this type of intermembrane or interosseous membrane joint is seen in tibia and fibula. It is seen in radius and the ulna, and so like between two of the interosseous bones. So suture is a fibrous joint in the option. These are all the explanations of the other options. The suture is a type of fibrous joint which occurs only in the cranium or the skull. So the joints of the skull are sutures. Then ligament, we all know, it is a fibrous connective tissue connecting bones to the other bones. So another is fontanelle. Fontanelle is a special anatomic feature of the infant human skull in which you can see soft membranous caps. We'll talk about fontanelles in the another question. So just remember, it is a special anatomical feature of an infant human skull comprising of soft membranous caps between the cranial bones. Then again, a gomphosis is a dentoalveolar syndesmosis, or a joint that binds the teeth to the bony teeth sockets in the maxillary bone and the mandible. So the fibrous connection between a tooth and its socket is a periodontal ligament. So I think this clears it. Let's go to the next one. So 34th question is that usually the IV injection is done into the medial cubital vein because it is slightly movable due to fixation by the soft tissues. So what does it fix in the cubital fossa? So you need to remember, this is a common clinical concept that for giving an IV into a vein, you need to choose a vein that is stable. So it doesn't move. If you like slightly palpate the skin, the vein shouldn't move because it would be difficult to inject a syringe or a needle into it. So normally we choose the median cubital vein. Why do we do that? Because median cubital vein is a supervision vein of the upper limb. Here you can see the medial cubital vein. Why it is chosen for IV injections? Because it is fixed into its position by the aponeurosis of biceps muscle. So it is fixed, and that is why it is used for venipunctures and IV cannulas. So it remains stationary because it is fixed by the biceps femoris biceps brachis muscles aponeurosis. So that is why median cubital vein is used for IV injections. So this is a simple concept. I think that clears it. So let's go to the next one. So 35th question is that victim has a elbow joint trauma with eversion of the medial epicondyle of humerus. What nerve can be damaged? So you can see the pathway of the ulnar nerve over here. First of all, always remember for anatomy that nerves originate from the spinal roots. The origination of ulnar nerve is C8 or T1 in the spinal cord, and the ulnar nerve has the following functions. First of all, motor functions are that it innervates two muscles of the interior forearm, flexor carpi ulnaris and medial half of flexor digitorum profundus, which means deep flexor muscles of digits. Then we have interesting muscles of the hand except the thenar muscles and the lateral two lumbricals. Then we have the sensory functions. It innervates the medial one and a half fingers and the associated palm area. So this is not important for the question, but it is important for knowledge of anatomy. So anyway, related to the question, you can see the pathway of ulnar nerve. Ulnar nerve comes from the arm, and near the junction between the humerus and radius and ulna, the joint, the ulnar nerve rounds its way behind the medial epicondyle. So in this patient, where there was an injury of the medial epicondyle here, so if there is an injury over here, there is a very high probability that ulnar nerve can be damaged. So this is why ulnar nerve is also known as funny bone. So if you bang your bang your arm, if you bang the region of your medial epicondyle somewhere on the table, then you have a stinging sensation up your little finger and back to your arm, isn't it? So this is because of irritation of ulnar nerve. So elbow joint at the medial epicondyle, if it is damaged, then there is a high probability ulnar nerve can be damaged. So let's go to the next one. 36th says that a 54-year-old man was admitted to the hospital with complaints of pain in the right subcostal region, vomiting with blood. Objectively, it's observed that the liver is enlarged and there are varicose veins in the stomach and esophagus. It is asking what is the dysfunction of the which vessel has dysfunction causing these symptoms. So let's understand one thing. In the objective examination or objective observation, you can see there is liver enlargement, and also it is summated with varicose vein in the stomach and esophagus. So there is a very strong complication of increased blood pressure in portal vein. So portal vein, you all know, portal vein is a blood vessel that connects the intestine directly with the liver. So it carries all the nutrients and absorbed substances to the liver, all the xenobiotics and even the toxins and the fats and the carbs and the proteins from the gastrointestinal tract to the liver. So if there is an increased blood pressure in portal vein, it is called as portal hypertension. Now, one of the side effects or one of the complications of portal hypertension is that there occurs esophageal and stomach varices. What are esophageal varices? Esophageal varices are extremely dilated or extremely swollen submucosal veins in the lower third of esophagus, which results in various complications. Sometimes what happens, these veins can burst. This will lead to blood into the esophagus, which can be seen during vomiting. So this is a complication of it is a complication of portal hypertension. Esophageal varices can lead to perforation, or which can lead to bleeding into the esophagus, which can be seen in vomiting. This was happening in this patient, which was complained of pain in the right subcostal region, and there is vomiting with blood, and all the other objective symptoms, hepatomegaly and varicose veins in the stomach and esophagus, they all tie up to vena porta dysfunction or vena porta hypertension. So I think that clears it. So let's go to the next one. In the 37th question, this by the examination of a 2-year-old child revealed physical developmental lag. The child often has pneumonias. The child was diagnosed with non-closure of ductus arteriosus. So hemodynamic disorder was caused by intercommunication of the following vessels. So we have done this question before in this video series. Let's revise it quickly. Now, ductus arteriosus is a connection between the trunk of pulmonary artery to the proximal descending aorta in a fetus. Now, what happens when this duct is normally after birth, this duct is closed. But what happens if it is not closed? That condition is called as patent ductus arteriosus or PDA, in which there is a persistent communication between the descending thoracic aorta and the pulmonary artery that results from the failure of normal closure. Now this can cause various symptoms, and the treatment for this is surgical treatment or surgical repair. And in our patient, you can see the patient has frequent pneumonias, developmental lags, and his duct is not closed. So normally the answer of this question is that this duct is a connection between aorta and pulmonary trunk, and that's it. Let's go to the next one. 38th question is that a 5-year-old child was admitted to ENT department, otorhinolaryngological department or ENT department, with diagnosis of suppurative inflammation of middle ear. Suppurative means pus related. Now disease started from the inflammation of nasopharynx, and they are saying that through what canal of temporal bone did the infection get into tympanic cavity. So you can see the inflammation started in the nasopharynx and then it traveled to the middle ear. So there is a connection between the middle ear and nasopharynx, which is known as musculotubular canal or canalis musculotubularis. It is a double canal for the auditory tube and the tensor tympani muscle that lies in front of the carotid canal and leads into tympanic cavity. Now the bony part of the eustachian tube occupies the large inferior portion of this canal. So this canal houses the eustachian tube. The eustachian tube is a canal that connects the middle ear to the nasopharynx. So this tube is one of the pathways by which infections can travel from the nasopharynx to the middle ear or vice versa. So this connection or this tunnel or this tube is the reason that in our patient infection traveled from the nasopharynx to the middle ear. That is why the answer is musculotubal canal. Correct? Understood? Good. Let's go to the next one. So in 39th, it is again a question from ENT that inflammation of the tympanic cavity or purulent otitis media, you learn this in ENT in 4th year, was complicated by inflammation of mammillary process sockets. So what walls of tympanic cavity did the pus penetrate into the sockets through? So now we'll get to learn about the walls of tympanic cavity or middle ear. So the roof of the middle ear is formed by teres part of temporal bone. It separates the middle ear from middle cranial fossa. The floor is The floor separates the middle ear from interior jugular vein. It is also called as jugular floor or jugular wall. And then we have the lateral wall. It is made up of the tympanic membrane or the what you call in layman language as eardrum, and also the lateral wall of epitympanic recess. The median wall is formed of median wall of the middle ear is formed of lateral wall of inner ear. It contains important oval and round windows. Now we have the anterior wall. It contains two openings, one for the auditory tube and one for the tensor tympani muscles, which tenses the tympanic membrane. Then we have the most important wall, which is relevant to our question, the mastoid wall or the posterior wall, which contains the bony partition between the tympanic cavity and mastoid ear cells. Mastoid antrum is the site of communication between middle ear and antrum, and the mammillary sockets that we are told in the question, mammillary process sockets, are nothing but mastoid hair cells, and this is the wall through which the pus penetrated into the sockets. Clear? Good. Let's go to the next one. In 40th question, a 19-year-old female suffers from tachycardia in rest condition, weight loss, excessive sweating, exophthalmos and irritability. What hormone would you expect to find elevated in her serum? Now all these symptoms are characteristic of hyperthyroidism. You can see hyperthyroidism, all these excessive sweating, muscle twitching, redness in palm, bulging eyes or exophthalmos, changes in menstrual cycle, hair loss, skin thinning or weight loss, goiter, irregular menstruation, all these symptoms. Etiology of hyperparathyroidism can be Graves' disease or multinodular goiter or thyroid inflammation and so many others. Drug induced even it can be, or even it can be metastatic thyroid cancer. Importantly, symptoms, classical symptoms or characteristic symptoms are nervousness, palpitations, tachycardia, hyperactivity, increased sweating, heat hypersensitivity, fatigue, increased appetite, weight loss, insomnia, weakness, exophthalmos or eye bulging, tremor, bowel movements are more frequent. So this is characteristic for our patient here. So therefore, elevation of thyroxine or the thyroid hormone is most suspected. Also for treatment, you give antithyroid medications, methimazole or propylthiouracil, beta blockers, iodine, or if that doesn't work, we can give radioactive iodine therapy. And if nothing works, we always have the option of surgical removal of thyroid gland. So that clears it. Symptoms were given and we diagnosed it as hyperthyroidism, which means elevated thyroxine. Good. So 41 question is a bit confusing, so you need to stay with me. A 60-year-old patient was diagnosed with hypothalamic lateral nuclei stroke. So what changes in the patient behavior may be expected? So there are many nucleus in the hypothalamus. In the anterior part of hypothalamus, there are paraventricular nucleus which are related to oxytocin release, supraoptic nucleus related to vasopressin or ADH release, medial preoptic area related to bladder contraction, reducing heart rate and blood pressure, posterior preoptic and anterior hypothalamic areas related to thermoregulation, sweating, and thyrotropin inhibition. So this is the thermoregulation center. Then the posterior hypothalamus has ventromedial nucleus, which is responsible for satiety and neuroendocrine control. Satiety means the feeling of satisfaction after having food. Okay, so this is the what that makes your tummy feel good that you have eaten enough. Then we have the lateral hypothalamic area or the lateral nuclei, which is responsible for thirst and hunger. Then we have these other areas, but for us we need to remember these two. Now in our patient, there was a stroke of lateral nuclei. So lateral nuclei over here is responsible for thirst and hunger, to tell your body that you are thirsty and you are hungry. So if this nuclei is destroyed and if it does not work due to a stroke, then your thirst center or your hunger center will be disrupted. Then you won't get feeling of hunger, which will mean that you reject food. Correct? So this is why in this patient there is rejection of food because of lateral nuclei stroke. Similarly, if the ventromedial nucleus over here is destroyed, then what will happen? The feeling of satisfaction will be gone and you will always feel hungry. So these are the two nucleuses or two areas of hypothalamus related to hunger and satiety. And I think you understood that lateral nuclei is responsible for thirst and hunger, and if this is destroyed, the patient will reject food. If ventromedial nucleus, which is responsible for satisfaction of food, if this is destroyed, then you will always feel more hungry and more hungry. So I guess you have a reason to suspect that you have an issue with ventromedial nucleus like me, because I always feel hungry all the time. So anyway, let's go to the next one. Now 42nd question is a simple one, and let's not complicate things. The process of heart transplantation determined that the viability of myocardial cells. So what the determination of what myocardial parameter is most important. So you see, during heart transplant, you need to see if the heart you are using for your transplant recipient is viable or not. So the most commonly used or the most sensible parameter to check is that if the cardiomyocytes rest potential is normal or not. So if the rest potential of the cardiomyocytes is normal, that means the cells of the leaky channels or the pumps of the cardiomyocytes are working, which means that the heart is in a good condition. So that is why there is a determination of rest potential of cardiomyocytes, which is the most important during heart transplants. Simple? Good. Let's go to the next one. So 43 question says that it is necessary to take the cerebrospinal fluid from a patient with suspected inflammation of brain tunics. Now diagnostic puncture was performed between the arches of the lumbar vertebra. During the puncture, the needle went through the following ligament. So there are these spinal ligaments. We have to focus on ligament flavum over the yellow ligament. Now the yellow ligament, it forms a cover over the dura mater. So let's talk about it more over here. So this over here, let's imagine this picture. So the first thing that a needle pierces during a lumbar puncture is in the spinal cord is the yellow flavor ligament. So what is the flavor ligament? It forms a cover over the dura mater, a layer of tissue that protects the spinal cord. This ligament connects under the facet joint to clear a small curtain over the posterior openings of the vertebrae. You can see this ligament flavum here. This is the dorsal part of the vertebrae. This is the ventral part. So backwards would be ligamental flavum, which forms a curtain. And the first thing would be penetrate during a lumbar puncture would be yellow flaval ligament. So the needle went through the yellow flaval ligament. That is why the answer is yellow ligament or the flaval ligament. So when the needle is inserted and it is pushed until there is a give is like if the needle goes in, that feeling, and it enters the lumbar system where the ligament flavum is housed. So the first ligament to be penetrated is ligament flavum. Clears it? Simple? Let's go. So 44th question is a simple one. It says that nowadays 50 minor bases have been found in the tRNA structure besides the main 4 nitrogenous bases. Main 4 are adenine, cytosine, uracil and guanine for RNA, and for DNA we have thymidine. So other than these, there are 50 minor bases, and out of the options, cysteine is amino acid and dihydrouracil is the intermediate of uracil, and this is a minor nitrogenous base which can be found in tRNA structure. Out of all the options, the most sensible one is dihydrouracil. All three over here, cytosine, adenine and uracil, are major nitrogenous bases, and cysteine is an amino acid. So 45th question is that obstructive jaundice developed in a 60-year-old patient because of malignant tumor of big papillary or major papillary of the duodenum. So lumen of what anatomical structure is squeezed with this tumor? So we did this before, that in the major duodenal papilla of the duodenum, there is an opening of ampulla of Vater or hepatopancreatic ampulla. So this ampulla is the site where pancreatic and bile ducts open into the duodenum, and this is located in the major duodenal papilla, which is located on the longitudinal fold on the medial part of descending part of duodenum, which is important for the previous question. So over here in the question they asked that a 60-year-old patient had the tumor of this major papilla. So what lumen will be squeezed with the tumor? That is the hepatopancreatic ampulla or ampulla of Vater. So that does it for today, and today we completed a little more questions than the last video. We did 15 questions. We'll try to pick up pace like this so that the base series can end quickly and you have more time to prepare for your croc. And before we end, I would like to urge you to please click that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And remember to drop down a comment of what base you would like to see between the pathophysiology base and the medical biology base, because it would be easier for us to prepare the base for you, prepare the answers, prepare the solutions, and give a video in less amount of time. So this has been good, and see you in the next one. Thank you.